young fella, and I was like, he was just eyeballing, like, I'm going to make your life hell. And I was like, I don't win that game over. Yeah. It is all over.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4 of the Impact Policy Podcast. My name's Sam Johnson and I'm privileged today to be joined by the amazing Nat Heath. Been a fan of Nat's for a while now, been following him around since the first time I ever saw him was emceeing a NAIDOC community event in Glebe. Way back in the day. It was the first time I ever saw you on the mic.
They never asked me back.
Well, it's his second appearance since then. No, we're seriously so lucky to have him here. Big fan. We've moved in similar circles for a long time now. I've got to see some of the great stuff that you've done professionally, personally, and really just stoked to be able to sit down and have a yarn and talk all things values, passions, and what you're working on at the moment. So yeah. I won't talk too much about you. I'll give you an opportunity now to tell everyone a little bit about yourself, who you are, where's your mob from, what you're doing, and all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, too easy. Well, thanks for having us. Friday afternoon, it's always good. On the waters, just for everyone's point of view, it's Friday afternoon. But I mean, before I begin, I do want to acknowledge that we do meet on Aboriginal land. I think we're on Wongal clan here, or is it still Gadigal? Probably on the border.
On the border, yeah.
Yeah. So acknowledge, our brothers and sisters, and you as another brother, and all the Aboriginal people that come before us. A bit about myself. So Maru and Noongar man. So Noongar, for those that watch your podcast, I'll lay claim to him. I never usually do, but relate to Adam Hansen. So Meneng people of the Noongar Nation. Mm-hmm. So Meneng is, down like the Esperance, Bremer Bay sort of region. We come from what's called like the coin family. Mm-hmm. And Maru is Western Desert, so Mudujara people. My great-grandmother was from a community called Walloona. She was part of the Stolen Generation, mm-hmm. So same family group as Red Proof Fence. Walloona is actually, if you've seen the movie, where the cousin Gracie's going, she's going to find her mother. Yeah. So that's where my great-grandmother was from. Yeah, wow. Taken to Moore River with her two sisters, and her two sisters did the same escape and walked back to Walloona, and she was left behind. Yeah, true. A pretty interesting thing about her is she was actually the domestic servant or slave, depending on the way that you interpret it, to A.O. Neville, Mr. Devil.
Really?
And this was before he became the Chief Protector of Aboriginal People.
Yep.
And she, so back in the day, like obviously they didn't want blackfellas marrying each other, and she met my great-grandfather, whose name was Philip Heath. And Heath, the English, like I guess the surname comes from Cornwall, but he was an Aboriginal man, and she told A.O. Neville that, he was a white fella that she'd met.
Yeah.
And anyway, over time, so A.O. Neville's writing to the then Chief Protector of Aboriginal People and saying, like, Lillian's met this Englishman, like, we approve, this is great.
Yeah.
And then the next one's like, I'm sort of worried that maybe Philip's a black fella.
Yeah.
And the next one's like, Lillian's run off with an Aboriginal man.
Yeah.
And Philip, those times you get in big trouble, get arrested for essentially breaking the law.
Totally.
And he was like, sort of up you, because he had Portuguese heritage as well, English heritage, and obviously Aboriginal Noongar ways. But he's like, you're not going to stop me from marrying this woman, and they end up going to Fremantle. But what I love about that is A.O. Neville, Mr. Devil, even before he became Chief Protector of Aboriginal People and controlling Aboriginal people's lives in WA, he couldn't control my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather. So I like to think we come from a line of disobedient people, which I'm a bit oppositional, defiant myself. So I guess that's a bit like my family heritage. But born in Sydney, grew up in Foster. I guess like how we've sort of intersected is like I've always been working in education, and very passionate about Aboriginal education, and have been for a long time, but also kind of stumbled into that from high school, which we might touch on anyway. But so right now I'm the manager of the First Nations team in early childhood education. Set up an organisation called TriMob too, which is a Aboriginal Tri-Athlon triathlon club open to all, which has a couple of simple goals. One, get more blackfellas into the sport. and two, get the rest of Australia celebrating Indigenous culture, the oldest living remaining culture in the world.
Yeah, mad, unreal. Take us back to some of those early days when you talked about your sort of journey into the education space.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily a straightforward one for you?
No, so, you know, Foster, I had a great life growing up in Foster, I have to say, but like any place that had its challenges. And I mean, I was only at school to play sport. I did well academically if I applied myself, but I didn't necessarily find education that interesting. But my grandfather, Kobe Heath, he was a merchant seaman. And so going back to the coin collection, where our family originated, coin was a Portuguese sailor. And pretty much all of our sort of family lineage have worked in like the shipping industry in some way.
Okay.
So grandfather was a merchant seaman. My father was, when he did work, so my father passed away at a young age, my biological dad. And his two brothers all worked in the as merchant seamen. And so my father had passed away, the middle brother, my uncle, had passed away, and my youngest, the youngest uncle, who I idolised, he worked in as a merchant seaman. So I just wanted to be like my uncle. And then I got really fascinated in sort of like marine, growing up on the beach. Like I was really fascinated. I did like in year 10 work experience at Sydney Aquarium. And year 9, 10 did marine biology. And around that sort of same time, so finished year 10, and in year 11, 12, you got to select your subjects. And my first preference was marine biology again, and second preference was Aboriginal studies. And most of the kids who did marine biology dropped out of school, so it didn't get up, and Aboriginal studies did get up, so I went into that. And at the same time, I was kind of not getting into trouble, but in roll call, like I just didn't get along with the teacher. And each roll call had to have a representative go to the SRC. And so because her and I used to clash, she decided to make me the SRC rep for the roll call, so she'd get rid of me once a week.
Yeah.
And through that, what happened, ended up a couple of other blackfellas in that SRC group, and we had a big Aboriginal population within the school, and like a few of the kids would always struggle as far as when they transitioned from primary school into the high school. So we decided we'd set up a mentoring program. So us older kids would like mentor the year 7 kids as they come through. Yeah. And me and my mate Byron Stewart, we got the 3 cheekiest kids like on earth. Like they're just, yeah, they were funny kids. It was Eddie, Dale, and Ronald were their names. And I remember when they came in. At first, like they were still at primary school, so we were like running through like a sort of transition day. And Jai Simon, one of the blackfellas at home, he was now working at the school. And I remember at first, like I was just sort of, we're doing stuff with the kids, but I was kind of like being naughty, and and I remember him just looking at me and just shaking his head.
Yeah.
And it was like a real pivotal moment where I was like, oh shit, like I've got to grow up here. Like I can either be a good mentor or a bad mentor.
Yeah.
So that like was like in a split second, like a little bit of a pivotal moment. And then at the same time, we started doing Aboriginal studies. So I started to learn more of like historical things that had happened to our people, which had, you know, good outcomes, but like also negative outcomes. And I just remember being like, oh, like I can do something about this. And it was just like I had that course, marine biology, not getting up, learning more around, you know, the struggles of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and then also like mentoring these kids. I was like, oh, like I'm kind of got a gift. Oh, not a gift, but I'm pretty good at this, but I also enjoy it.
Yeah.
And literally, like it might have been like a few months later, then a lad from Wallatuka Institute, which is the Aboriginal unit at Newcastle Uni, came in and started talking about uni. And my dad, who raised us, who was my nana's partner, he was like, you know, maybe you could go to university, like think about giving that a go, and like if that fails, then you can go do the merchant seaman sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, sort of months kind of went on, and, you know, I did all right, at school, and then applied for uni, didn't think too much about it, and, you know, applied for a Bachelor of Social Science. and ended up getting in. So there was just like all these like accidental things that happened. And even then, when I went to uni, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like some teachers was like, "You should be a teacher," but I knew I didn't want to be a teacher, but I was interested in Aboriginal education. So I ended up doing that, Bachelor of Social Science, and sort of during uni, I ended up working at what we call childcare. So that's like an early years 0 to 5. Also did some work at Raymond Terrace High, which is now called Hunter River High. We used to do a Friday afternoon mentoring program, which was through either Ulitar or Yarntine. And did like an Aboriginal mentoring TAFE sort of course. So like there was just, all these little things that sort of led us into a trajectory of education. Then did Aboriginal education specific courses, which were just mainly for teachers, and did really well. And I kind of just lucked out. Like I did well at uni, and then I applied for jobs, and just like most uni students didn't have a great deal of experience, like really in-depth experience. Like I'd done casual work, but just hadn't, I guess, like when you're competing for a job, like you're competing against people maybe with degrees and experience. So I applied for jobs like at Sport and Rec, DCJ, and like, so fortunately I got knocked back. And then I applied for this job up at, with the Department of Education for this program called Kids Excel. And the job was at, essentially be the facilitator at either at Ballina Public School or Cabbage Tree Island. And I didn't think much of it. Rolled up, me and my dad drove up, because I was still living in Newcastle. Went to this like interview at Cabbage Tree Island, kind of went, because I'd done a few interviews, and you kind of know like whether you've done well, and I was sort of went away and I was like, I think I did alright at that,
How old were you then?
I was 21.
Okay.
Yeah. So I finished uni, when I was 21. It was like a straight 3-year degree, in and out kind of thing. And then I got a call. So it was interesting. They rang us up actually after the interview, and they're like, if you got one of the jobs, which one would you want, Cabbage Tree or Ballina? And I just went Ballina because I kind of knew a bit more about Ballina. And then like all that night, I couldn't stop tossing and turning. I was like, because Cabbage Tree was all Aboriginal. It was like a really unique school. And then I rang up the next day. I was like, I changed my mind. I'd do Cabbage Tree, and you could see it kind of through Dion Anderson. She's an Aboriginal principal. But anyway, they like rang us like a week later and like, we're going to offer you a job, but it's at the Ballina. Will you take it? And I was like, all right. Like, I don't know. Like, so, I just kind of packed up my stuff from Newcastle, drove up. I was meant to start work on a Wednesday, and I drove up on the Tuesday, had nowhere to live, went to a caravan park and said, here, got a job and I need somewhere to stay. And they're like, well, you can stay, but you've got to sign like a month lease and you've got to pay 3 weeks up front. It's like, I only have enough rent for a week, And they were really cool, and they let us stay, and I ended up living in this caravan park for a bit over a year. But
wow.
So all these like accidental things, and they're getting knocked back from all these jobs which weren't necessarily educational based. And then I landed this job which was at a school, and it's still today the best job I ever had, because I got to run like educational programs, work with the school, the community, to try to address like getting better educational outcomes, whether that was NAPLAN, whether that was attendance, whether that was reducing suspension.
Totally.
And we had like fantastic results, and like most government they decided, it was a 4-year pilot, and I came in the back end of the last 2 years, and they went, that worked, tick box, we're not going to continue. But it just then continued that trajectory of like, okay, education's what I do. That's kind of like the long story of like just all these accidental things ended up, I guess, leading me to a path of working in education. And probably the one thing, there's lots of people who are great with kids, but I would like put myself with anyone with the ability to work with young people. Like I think like some people got gifts at sport, some people got gifts at musician, and like one of my gifts is, I think my gift is actually being able to work with kids. Yeah,
totally. So you've done that for so many years now, over a decade professionally.
Yeah.
You touched on some of those challenges when working in that sort of space? When you said you came into that project at the end of a 2-year funding cycle and it's tick box, see you later.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you see in this space when we talk about Aboriginal education in terms of, closing the gap or, actually meaningfully getting progress in community?
So some people will like this, some people won't. I think closing the gap fundamentally fails because it looks at Aboriginal people as the problem and not the system as the problem. So, all the targets around, so for the specific area that I work in early education now for New South Wales Gov, but they've got targets around participation of Aboriginal children in the year before school, and we actually do quite well in that.
Yeah.
But then it's the main targets are like Aboriginal kids finishing year 12 or having good NAPLAN results. But, the educational context isn't set up for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people fitting into a Western education system.
100%.
So I think, at its fundamental core, closing the gap is trying to fit circular people into a square hole.
Totally.
And even if it's looking at, say, targets around, we want to decrease the incarceration rates of Aboriginal people. So it's let's try to stop Aboriginal people go to jail, but not actually look at the policing system and the over-policing.
Totally.
So it doesn't look at it as, I think it thinks it looks at it as a system thing, but it looks as Aboriginal people are the system.
Totally.
So I think the biggest challenge for our mob is trying to fit into a system that doesn't necessarily work for us. And I actually think that for a lot of kids, I think education...
Yeah, definitely.
For people who are good rope learners, and that, that system's perfect, works great.
Totally.
But for a lot of kinesthetic style learners, so people learn to do, so people you see that end up in trades, school just doesn't work. And that's why most of the time, back in our day, we're old, we're pretty old, most people who went into trades, they dropped out in year 10, some prior. And now it's some of them you see, they're got $1 million businesses.
Yeah.
But it's we try to apply that if you don't finish school, that you're going to fail in life.
Definitely.
But it's really that system is failing, that what's going to work for that person.
Definitely.
So I think personally we need to create our own Aboriginal educational approach. And the good thing we're starting to see is that, so for instance up in Coffs Harbour with Clark Webb and his community, they've decided, okay, we will just create our own school.
Yeah.
And I do actually think fundamentally that's the right approach. And there's going to be, I think, non-Indigenous kids and Aboriginal kids that will do all right in the current education system.
Totally.
Because they can apply that learning, and that's fine.
Definitely.
But I think it's fundamental value. People see today best practice as having a perspective. Definitely. And doing a class, a couple of times a week. But why not just apply that lens and viewpoint and way of doing things all the time?
Totally.
So that's where I think the system doesn't work. And it's interesting because I do work for the New South Wales Department of Education, and I have to, I guess, grasp with this, where I think a system fundamentally fails, but yet I'm employed and I see what I can do to try to bend and change.
Totally.
But I don't think it will ever completely change, and I think, and I've said this well before I ever worked in government, is realistically, when we think of us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we demand stuff of the government, but I don't think we've seen historically that the government can't do that, doesn't know how to change things to get better outcomes for Aboriginal people. I think we just have to create our own way of doing it.
Totally.
And try to work out, where we get the money from to make that happen. If you set up a school, Department of Education has to pay.
Definitely.
Same with all the independent schools.
Totally.
So you just got to go, well, we'll just create our own.
Yeah, that's it.
Our own healthcare, and I just think you just got to find a way, as opposed to waiting for a government to go, we'll help you fix things. Just go, we're just going to fix it ourselves.
I think you're right. We're really interested at the moment in the flexible learning space. And we've invested a lot of time into some research and sort of policy thinking in that space. And I think a couple of those, the systems gaps continue to just come up again and again. And we use Walgett for an example, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so much strength and resilience in that community, but every couple of months the media's blasting the school about the systemic failures and gaps and the problem of the Aboriginal community and young people, and all that sort of stuff. But so it's a connected community school. It's been invested so much funding and resources over a period, like we're talking years, right? And so still the same challenges exist in terms of all those educational outcomes. So there's fundamental needs of those young people that aren't being met, that school's not designed to provide for. They don't operate from all those things that you just talked about, you know, embedding Aboriginal perspectives as the worldview to everything that we do, centering social and emotional well-being and healing and culture at the centre of, you know, how we think about education and learning and development. And particularly for communities like Walgett and others, where there has been complex needs in communities, the traditional education system cannot address. They're not equipped or designed or resourced to be able to operate from that sort of way of thinking and knowing and doing. So it's no surprise that those resources that are invested continue to see no significant outcomes. And but we talk with community has been fighting this battle with Department of Education for years, you know, continually backing against, you know, about education needs to be accountable. They need to address this issue, and I get it 100%. But one of the things that we sort of said is like you have so much limited energy and resources in community, right? So you can continue to fight this Western government department to solve this problem. And there's an element of that that's important because it's about accountability. Like they do have a part in this puzzle.
Yeah, of course,
But also, there's so much strength, resilience and capability in community for you to be able to think about what does education look like for young people in this community? And how can we design something that can address these barriers and gaps? And whether it's that community or others that we've worked in, it's a big part of what we've seen is the importance of building confidence and capability in community to go, actually, hold on a second, we are the experts in our young people in our communities and the gaps and what's needed. With a bit of support and a bit of resource around that, there's no reason why we can't be in a position to address these problems, as opposed to, you know, fighting or relying or campaigning and advocating for government to come in and solve it. And I think you pretty much spell it on the head when you talk about that whole systems thinking. It's like square peg in a round hole.
The belief is a big thing, I guess, within like a lot of our communities. Like you do need, so like a lot of people do have the ability, but whether they realise they even have the ability, I think a lot of people just don't know they have that capacity or ability. And you find also a lot of our people like are humble too, and sometimes you've got to put yourself out there to create change, and like that can be difficult within our communities too, both like good ways and bad ways. Like good ways in that, you know, you might be not see yourself in that light to be able to lead people, but then also sometimes when people do take a step up, you can have some people who like might knock you back. So that's always like a hard thing for people to navigate. And then like communities like Walgett, I got to be careful because I work for the Department of Education, but you know, like one of the big, I guess, challenges with like the current educational structure there too is they can't get people, and many of the like communities in those sort of like regions where it seems a little bit difficult, Orange would be another example, is you don't get any stability of educators or principals. And then I won't mention the school, but one of the guys I ride bikes with, so his partner was working as a principal at one school, and like there was lots of issues. And I guess like as a principal, you are a senior in a senior position, and therefore like when you're talking to kids, like you think there's going to be that respect given, but you can never respect if the kids know you're going to be gone in a couple of months.
Totally.
And I think that's one of the big challenges with like those communities. There's never any stability of people coming, because you're like, even if say you were to go in and you're the best educator on earth, the kids are just going, he's going to leave.
Yeah.
He's going to leave.
Totally.
He's going to leave. And so we've got so much trauma in our communities through, stolen generation, the continuing out of home care system. So we've got communities that have already got heightened engagement. If you start to learn about attachment theories and all that, there's probably a lot of our mob are running on like this almost like detachment, like eventually people are going to leave us, because that's what sometimes happens forcibly.
Totally.
And then in the education system, they'd just be seeing teachers rotate through. So you can get like the best educator, but you're like, I don't believe you're going to be here in 6 months. So like whether you can ever get that full respect. And I think like I reckon the keys to a person being a good educator always comes down to relationships. And from like, I guess many of those communities, those teachers never get those relationships. And that's why I think, going back to what you're saying, is if you can build from within the community, then that relationship's already there, because that person is from that community. And that's why I think we've got to look at how do we create an education system that's fit for purpose for our mob, that can be constructed from their own community.
Definitely.
And that's where there's the capacity, but sometimes you might need someone like a Clark Webb from COPS, who's now doing it, to be able to then go out and teach the other communities, like, here's a model, and you can apply it within your community, and obviously adapt it to suit your community.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a critical conversation, like, because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, we've touched on some of those structural challenges and barriers and realities for our people and our communities. But you've spent a lot of time working on the front line with young people in schools and in community. Well, what's some of the things that you've seen in your experience in terms of, you touched on relationships as well, but like in terms of what you've seen on the front line, what are some of the critical challenges and critical ingredients for success when it comes to working with young people?
It's a good question.
Or even just engaging young people meaningfully, all that sort of stuff.
Well, as far as engagement, I think it's about being you and being real. A good example, actually, so Hannah Cheeseman, who's a white fella, who worked with us at AIM, like the whitest of white.
Yeah.
And when she was interesting, so she got partnered kind of up with us in the Sydney Uni program. Initially, I just found her annoying. Yeah. Which I feel bad about now.
Sorry, Anna.
Yeah, she knows all this. But like, you could see her go out, and like she was so like, she knew she wasn't, like, she kind of didn't fit. So she would try so hard to like impress, and you could see like that just sort of turned away kids a little bit. Yeah. Which like made me like even a little bit more annoyed. I was like, why do we have this girl in our team? Why did they employ her? Yeah. And eventually, like at this time, so I was just like a program manager. I wasn't like the head manager, and the head manager at the time was Giannis. And he's like, I really need you to like kind of take her under your wing. Yeah. And one of the best conversations I had with her, I was like, is you're white. Yeah. Just own that you're white. And don't try to be not your white self in some respect. And once she did that, the kids, like, once she was real and like who she was and just a goofball and that, the kids loved her. Yeah. So I think that at the core is being you and not trying to pretend you're someone that you're not. Totally. Because kids are the best bullshit readers on earth. Yeah. Like, they know straight away. They're just like say if I went in and like tried to be someone that I'm not, like, they'd be like, you're full of shit, bro. Totally. They might not say it to you, but the way that they'll engage with you. Yeah. So I think you got to find is you got to be real, but you also do need to find a way to have some sort of connection, and that could be. It doesn't have to be like something obvious, and you don't have to change yourself. But most humans have something where they'll be able to find a commonality. That's a good point. Yeah, one of the one yarn I always like is, and I was just really lucky. I went into Sydney Secondary College.
Oh yeah.
At, I think it was Leichhardt. I can never remember. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Leichhardt. And there was this, I walked in, and I had only been with AIM for a couple of weeks. So ads had kind of, ads we had on the show was like, you go in and you do a pitch, you're trying to engage the kids to come and be on board with this program. And I walked in, and there's a group of kids, and I could see one young fella, and I was like, he was just eyeballing, like, I'm going to make your life hell. And I was like, if I don't win him over, it is all over. None of them come. And I'm like, I've got to win him. So we go around this, I was like, oh, I'll get people to introduce themselves. So each kid introduces, and like he just had like this bravado, like, I'm the man. And he was the man. In this small little pond. But he was still the man.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I've got to find a way to win him over. And he goes, so I'm like, oh, what's your name, brothers? And he's like, Jermaine Reed. And I sort of like went, oh.
Yeah, I know Jermaine.
And I'm like, Reed. I was like, he's like, yeah. And I was like, R-E-I-D? He's like, yeah. I was like, you from Galar?
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah. And I go like, block. The square, I think they call it. And he's like, yeah. I said, oh, true. I said, oh, my partner's a Reed. Who's my ex-partner now.
Yeah.
I said, oh, her pop was Trevor Toot Reed. Oh, that's like my uncle's dad.
Yeah,
and like and like that was lucky. And most black fellas would do that, like where you're from, try to work out.
Totally.
But he completely, you could see, and so like I started having this yarn about Galar, and so he's like, oh, like he knows like who I am. So then he comes up after, he's like, doing the handshake, whatnot, and I was like, got him. And because he was in, everyone else was in. So I think, the key to working, again, I always think relationships is key. I think also going a little bit above beyond. One of the things used to do at Ballina is, because Sydney's an interesting one, like I hope I don't offend you in this respect, I always find just people in general in Sydney, I actually think the blackfellas probably do it the best, or only ones, but people don't have a sense of community. So it's like, you might, like if you're a teacher in Sydney, like you might teach 9 to 5, but then do you go to the same sporting fields where the kids are at? And at Ballina, like I used to go and like watch the kids play football. So they would be like, oh, like we see him on Saturday. Like he cares, or they care. So I think like just having those connections, being real, and just being yourself. I've kind of waffled on here. I'm trying to remember what the actual key to the question was. Again,
critical ingredients for engaging young people and all that sort of stuff.
I think like, don't take it. I mean, I think what we forget is like kids are kids, and like even the question like now, like we go to kids and you say, what do you want to be? Like, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, and why should they have to worry about that? I think like just allow people to be people, and not have to, like, we're always like, what are you going to be? Where are you going to, like, and AIM actually used to do that. And I think it's good to have goals, but like the pressure of that we can apply to kids. So I think, I always look at the way that I work with my niece and nephew. I think it's just like, just try to give kids love, if that makes sense. Like, just be there, and be open to listen, but have fun. Don't take yourself too seriously, and also know, it's like good storytelling, know like when to like have fun with kids, but also apply like when you've got to have like a serious conversation too. Which I think is like really important, because you want kids to also have respect too. Like it's, because otherwise if it's always like just one, like they think it's like this is the way the world works, everything's like given, but you've got to be able to teach people like, how the world works and take people on an ebb and flow. And so I think the core is relationships, be yourself, and find some sort of commonality.
Yeah, I like the common ground piece, because I think you're right. Almost any of us can find a way to connect somewhere, there's got to be some thread, or whether it's a sports team or a connection to a community.
Yeah.
There's something there.
Yeah, the other thing I think that's important, which is probably where particularly the Western education system may fail a lot of kids, is because you're a teacher, you think that you should be respected, but I always think it's the other way around. It's like you need to get the kids respect to get the respect. So
Totally.
never go into applying a lens that I'm the authority, because realistically, like going back to that context of Leichhardt, Jermaine was the authority.
Yeah.
Because my goal is to get kids engaged.
Yeah.
So at the moment, he's the boss.
Yeah.
So if I go in and go, like, I've got to try to outboss you, like, you've already lost.
Totally.
So it's like, well, how do I actually
definitely
get you to respect me?
Yeah, and that's right, because your job was to engage, right? Your job wasn't to be an authority.
Yeah.
Just like with teaching, your
gotta
job
let
is
go
to
of your ego.
teach.
Yeah.
So your job is not to be an authority, it's to educate these kids.
Yeah.
And if that means gaining their respect, well, then that's what you need to do as a precursor.
So
Totally.
ego is one of the most powerful, but one of the most crippling things too. And you see it a lot where people cannot, like, it's good to have a healthy ego in like a competitive sense.
Yeah.
Or a confident sense to be able to like walk into a room and go, like, I believe in my ability to engage with kids. That's like a healthy ego. But if you're then not able to let go of an ego and go, well, Jermaine, you're not listening to me, out you go, then that's not a healthy ego. So it's about like knowing, in a way, like, like just letting go of like your own self-importance.
Totally. You touched on the work Clarkie's doing up in Coffs on Gumbaynggirr country before, and me and you connected a few years ago around work that I was doing in the Languages Trust.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about any of the languages work that you've done in the early childhood space or different things like that, and just around, I guess, what's exciting in terms of that? Because, I don't know, when me and you were in school, that no one was even talking about language and culture that much. So
none.
So it's exciting. I want to hear about it. I want people to understand, you know, what's happening.
Yeah. So just going, I guess, talking about us in school, the only things I remember that we learnt, and it wasn't what we learnt, it was like kids, it was guna, bubbly. So bubbly was like, or duri, but we said bubbly, and Jilua. That's all I remember growing up as a kid. There was no such thing as like learning Aboriginal languages. There was Aboriginal English, but not Aboriginal languages. So I started with the Department of Education end of 2016 when I finished up at AIM, and it was in 2018. Like, it was super difficult working in the Department of Ed to try to get anything up and running. And in 2000, it was right at the end of 2017, but the program started in 2018. We essentially created a program called Ningana No More. So Ningana, for those that don't know, Ningana, like, I guess it's a Bundjalung word, but kind of known, at least along the north coast, be quiet or shut up. And actually, the first time I ever heard the word Ningana was at my mate's party, and one of the old uncles, he was going, Ningana, like yelling out. And I'd never heard it, like, at the time, and I was like, what are they saying? He's like, oh, it means like, oh no, he goes, it means, he said it means leave me alone and be quiet. And none of us kids kind of like knew really what he was going on about. Anyway, like, that word sort of stuck in my head. Then you went to like Newcastle, and I used to date a girl who grew up Cruel Mission. They'd say Ning or Ningana quite a bit, or she did. So anyway, my executive director at the time said to us, because we just couldn't get any money off the government, which I don't think it was the government, it was more maybe like the people at the time who were above us. But she goes, I'm going to give you some money to try to develop something like for an Aboriginal languages program, and also a families-based program. So we'll just focus on the languages. But essentially, I designed a program called Ningana No More. So the idea was that our languages wouldn't be quiet anymore. I also kind of liked it because in the context, it can mean shut up too. So when the minister was like, oh, Ningana No More, she was like also saying like shut up as well, without knowing it. So essentially the idea was that one of the largest cohorts, if you look at cohorts of population, in the Aboriginal population, like the 0 to 4 cohort, I think it's like the second or third biggest cohort of like population. If you compare that to non-Indigenous, like the second biggest cohort's like around 49, 45 to 49 roughly. So it's completely different demographic. At the same time, they, our minister, the Minister for Early Childhood Education, was also the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, and they just passed the Languages Trust Act.
That's right.
So we kind of had a good opportunity to go, well, we could invest into an Aboriginal languages in early education, and if we can actually do it right, there's such a large cohort that we can really help with the revitalisation of Aboriginal languages. So essentially what we did is we got given $500,000. My role was to design a program that could then be applied and used by Aboriginal organisations or early education services, but had to have sign-off from the community and not by us as government agencies, because we essentially provide the funding, but who are we as government to say who can't?
Cultural authority around stuff.
So essentially it was a grants-based program, and only Aboriginal organisations and early education services could apply. Now, if an Aboriginal organisation applied, they had to get like early education services to say, yes, like we will have this organisation or this individual deliver language programs in our service. So one, they were the cultural authority, and we had an early education services that was going to engage.
Great.
And if an early education service was going to apply, then they had to get either partner with an Aboriginal organisation, or if they had like, say you were an early educator at that school, that's preschool, they then had to get like an Aboriginal organisation to go, we give authority to SAM that way it made sure there was like sort of checks and balances that community got a say on who and who does languages.
Critical. Was it hard to get that up as a sort of policy
model?
There
was a lot of explaining of why. And it took a while, but I think that was just, at that particular time, everything took a long time within that framework that was kind of created. So
was government nervous about giving community a level of authority, or?
No, I don't think so. I think what was different was we funded early education services. To fund a service that wasn't an early education service was different. So because we were potentially providing funding to an Aboriginal organisation which didn't run early education services. So a part of the program too is it had to be designed and delivered by an Aboriginal person with the authority from the community, but it also had to be designed by someone with a minimum Cert 3 early education too, to make sure, because it's one thing like, we've got lots of elders who can speak language, but they might not be able to apply it into the early years framework so that kids can actually fully articulate and understand. So but you see that a lot, even just at a university level. People have PhDs, but they can't teach because they just can't actually. They're so smart in what they do, but they can't actually scaffold it.
For sure.
A teaching, applying it in a teaching process. So you needed to make sure that you had someone with those qualifications and skill set who could then work with uncle and auntie or whoever is the educator, go, well, this is how we're going to apply it so that kids will be able to learn it.
Totally.
So we started that in 2018. And it was about $500,000, and some of the communities and organisations did really good work, and some probably weren't really where they thought they were at.
Okay.
And that's always going to be like different for each community, because each community is on a different pathway of
100%.
Language development and revitalisation.
Totally.
So you started to notice where, like Coffs Harbour, which is, we'll get to where they're at now, but like with what Clark is doing, they were by far, they got the most amount of money, but they were by far the most advanced. But that's not just because Clarkie happened to be there. That's because like Moorobai, an Aboriginal Language Corporation, was set up in the 80s. So if you think of it, it's
exactly.
like, it's nearly 2020. So you got, 80s, 90s, O's, 10s. So they're like on a 40-year pathway of language revitalisation. And then we've got communities, they're maybe only 2 or 3 years in. So you can't expect them to be at the same point in time.
Totally.
And that's, number of language people who can speak the language, who can then teach the language. And they also had like a great Aboriginal preschool up there to work with. So you've got these educators that you can then educate, who can then make sure it becomes an immersion of language. So anyway, fast forward, like with our programs, they were year on funding programs. And so we did a review, and one of the reviews said, you know, like for all our programs, there needs to be more like long-term sustainable funding.
Yep.
And the problem with our programs at that particular time is like it all depended on the leadership. If the leadership wanted to support that.
Internal leadership,
Or even a minister. You get a different minister potentially comes in and goes, oh, like, why are we funding that? Let's get rid of that. And like our minister has never done that. But you could, like, you can get a...
Risk is there.
Yeah, you get a change of government. They might be like, oh, like, we want to go this way. We're going to invest in here. And, you know, each department only gets so much money. So they've got to go... If, like, say a minister says, we're going to commit to doing this... If that's been publicly announced, and it's like, let's just say you've got $20 million as your budget, and that's going to cost 19, you're like, well, there's only another $1 million to play with, like, they've got to find what's in there. So your programs can miss out.
Yeah.
So we really, for a long time, had been advocating that we need, like, something structurally that gives commitment to these programs, but also commitment to educational outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So... At the end of 2019, like was it 2019? No, end of 2020. I'm trying to remember what year we're in. Yeah, end of 2020. Had a bit of like leadership change, but also the closing the gap refreshers were happening.
Yeah.
So we ended up sort of advocating and putting up papers around the need to have an Aboriginal early childhood education strategy, and not just to be like any other strategy, but it's actually co-designed by Mob.
Totally.
So we went through like a 3-part process where we did like a literature review, which most government orgs do. Then we had what we called roundtables, which actually Dixie Crawford, who we were talking about, we got her as an Aboriginal consultant to facilitate.
Yeah, okay.
So we got early educators, Aboriginal community people, and by this stage COVID was happening, so everything was kind of online, which was interesting because normally that wouldn't help, but it actually sped things up because you could actually get lots of people in immediately, and people like got tech savvy.
Yeah.
So we had these roundtables which kind of illuminated like, okay, here's the issues and what we need, and if you're going to do a strategy, what this should focus on. And then from that, we ended up establishing an Aboriginal advisory group. So the advisory group was really key, and again, we were really lucky we had good leadership buy into it. At the stage, we had a bit of a change in leadership. Kathleen Forrester came in, she was the executive director. She just came from Queensland Health, who had gone through this sort of process. So she was like, yeah, I'm all in.
Awesome.
So she signed off on like, let's establish an Aboriginal early childhood advisory group made up of just Aboriginal people. And then got a then commitment to then look at actually doing and designing a strategy. And then she kind of left, and then Gil White came in as executive director, and she bought into it too.
Yeah,
and she's a lawyer by trade, so she was really good as far as like
checks and balances.
Well, yeah, but like she would get through material so quick. So one of the problems with government is you might put a case up, and it might sit there with your executive for like months. She would have it back in an hour, and go back and forth. I couldn't keep up with her.
Yeah, wow.
I was like, I don't know how she does it.
Yeah.
And then we also had another fellow, Liam Finlay, who bought into it as a director as well. So the key was like we had Aboriginal people leading it, who were working with this co-design of what that should look like. So you know, fast forward over sort of like a 7-month process, we went through and co-designed this Aboriginal early childhood education advisory, but it had some key goals to it, and it was also around creating a framework which would then support making sure that whether it's those programs like Ninganano More or others, if they work, that we've got a commitment behind those.
Totally.
So we essentially the group had 5 specific goals or targets that we want to achieve. One was 2 of them were aligned to the Close the Gap target, so participation of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander children in the year before school. the goal was 95% by 2025. When I started at the end of 2016, it was 59.9%.
Yeah, wow.
And it's now at like 90%.
Yeah, wow.
So we've had a substantial growth, although there has been, that'll change a little bit because the new ABS data, there's been a 27% population growth with Aboriginal communities. So there'll be a bit of a recalibration of data, but essentially we've had like
significantly increased. Yeah.
Developmental outcomes, which was by 2031, 55% of Aboriginal children are assessed as developmentally on track in the ADC, which I have lots of views on that, but we won't go into that. But we're actually regressing in that.
Yeah, okay.
So there's talk around the impact of COVID with that, and that probably is a factor. But I also think, again, it's applying a Western lens to assessing the developmental outcomes of Aboriginal children. For instance, like children in NT who might speak 5 different Aboriginal languages are being assessed as having language developmental delays because their English isn't good.
Yeah.
But it's like a 6th language, so I have a disagreement with that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm not high enough to...
Not yet.
But, and the third target was we wanted 50% of Aboriginal children to have access to an Aboriginal languages program in early education. So that was quite significant because that's, if you think about it, there's roughly 6,000, bit more, 6,500 Aboriginal children that will be enrolled in early education the year before school. So you're looking at, 3,500 to 4,000 children that we're committing that will have an Aboriginal language program in.
Yeah, wow.
Then there's 2 other targets which we won't go into, but so that, because we put that as a specific target, now Ninganah No More, this $500,000 program, it's like, well, if you're going to get that many kids, you're going to have to invest a lot more money and give even more structure. So from that, we kind of doubled down. We've done like a $10 million commitment into Aboriginal languages over the next 4 years.
Yeah, wow.
With the goal of establishing like a number of Aboriginal language hubs.
That was in this budget? Is that the recent budget that come out, or was
No, so that was specifically under just for First Step strategy that we had. How early education historically worked as far as the Commonwealth provided funding to the states and territories based on targets they reach. So the Commonwealth had already given money to the states and they can do what they want. And essentially with the strategy, we got our executive to go, you're going to commit over $24 million specifically to the First Step strategy.
Yeah, okay.
As opposed to prior to that,
the
commitment was $1 million for Aboriginal Families Teachers Program and $500,000. So that's $1.5 million.
Yeah.
So you times that by 4, 3, that's $6 million. So we've like over quadrupled our commitment to specific Aboriginal educational programs. So that was like probably the biggest commitment by any singular government agency to closing the gap targets, but also to Aboriginal languages, like bigger than like even Aboriginal Affairs have probably made.
Totally.
So that was really cool to be a part of that process, and now we're in, I guess, the point of we've got like a commitment, now we've got to apply it. So we've essentially establishing Aboriginal language hubs, which we then, it goes through a tender process, and Aboriginal organisations are the only organisations that can apply to lead it, and essentially we will then invest money into an organisation, and then they go and deliver the Aboriginal language programs to the early education services.
Yeah, okay.
So we've set up our first hub, which is the Gumbayangi hub,
Yep.
and Bulari, Mulla and Yargan in partnership with Murabai are delivering that program. They're working with like, I think over 14 early education services.
Wow.
I think 4 of them are Aboriginal community controlled, and then Bowerville Preschool is predominantly an Aboriginal preschool population wise.
Yep.
So they went from like just working or being funded to really work with Aboriginal community preschool to now they're working with 4 or 5 plus like.
Wow.
So they do a minimum of 4 hours a week Aboriginal languages in those services.
Yep.
And then they also, for the other services, which are mainstream services, they do 1 hour of Aboriginal languages programs. So our goal is to set up other language hubs. We're at the process of going and setting up a Wiradjuri hub, which will just be based around like the Dubbo and surrounding regions.
Yep.
And then there's going to be like a Kamilaroi, Gomeroi, Uralarai, depending on which way.
Dialect you speak.
Yeah. and then we'll establish another hub. But outside those hubs, then we have grants, and that just gets applied the same way we used to do grants. So we invested like 500K again a year for the grants outside the hubs, and then we realised we could probably do more, so we got another 500K. So we're looking at nearly like $1 million worth of grants to sit outside those hubs. So the goal will obviously be to continue to grow and support Aboriginal languages in early education, and I guess that the first step strategy really provides a commitment from the government to do that. And now the part we've got to do is like, I guess, monitor and actually then showcase, okay, we've put this commitment and here's the outcomes from it, so that it's not just a commitment till 2025, it's a commitment till 2045 and whatnot.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest challenges, I reckon, hey, because that's where the impact lies long term with language revitalisation or language learning in general, right? Like you can't just implement it for 4 or 5 years and then that language gets lost. Or I think it was up Clark's Way, or someone was talking about when they were doing some stuff in the primary schools, I think it was, and then that stopped, and so there was nothing happening in the high schools, and then that language work just sort of gets lost in a lot of ways until those young people find it again in their own ways. But it's amazing to hear the journey in 5 years you've been in that space.
Yeah, well, 6.
5, 6.
Yeah, it's funny because after 1 week I wanted to quit that job.
Yeah.
And every week I want to quit that job. It's probably been maybe the most important job, but also the least enjoyable.
Yep.
And that's only because of the way that I like to, what I'm probably good at, and it's a very much hands-off style. It's around statewide policy and strategy, and not necessarily working directly with community or kids.
Yep.
And that's my jam.
Yeah, totally.
But it's very important because, like, if I, like, say with Ningina, like, that was really important. Yeah. Because I could see, like, how it should be applied in the community to make sure that it would work. Because it's hard to, particularly, like, languages are a sensitive thing, and different mobs have different, like, who should teach, who shouldn't.
100%.
So, like, I had this experience actually up at Ballina where they had a community vote on who should teach language. So, like, I understood the complexities of language within certain communities. So I was like, kind of use that understanding and go, well, if we had to do something that's statewide, how can we do it which gives some, like, cultural safety or cultural authority to the right, like, to the community, not to us as government. And we then go, oh yeah, like, Sam's should teach Dark and Young language, even though Sam's never lived in Central Coast and isn't Dark and Young. So making sure that it's done right. So, like, it's been it's really important because it's like, well, if I hadn't have been there, maybe there's no language program. 2, like, maybe if someone else who hadn't had that experience, it gets applied wrong. Yep, definitely. And then 3, because, like, for ages, like, I was like, I probably, like, this isn't my jam, I should get out. But I was always like, if I leave, like, this may all just unravel. Yeah, what for? So, when I started, there was really, like, we had a team of 3. Now we've got a team of 10. It's actually going to grow. So it's, like, now set up structurally, we've got a strategy which is at least a commitment for 5 years. Yep. All going well, I think that'll get extended and beyond. We've actually just gone through and got a commitment of re-establishing our advisory group, and actually we're now paying. So prior the advisory group was just voluntary. Yep. Now that we'll have a chair, they'll get paid $10,000 a year. Yeah, great. Other members will be paid $5,000. So we're starting to, like, have been able to influence senior exec to go, we need to be. Not only do we need to listen, we actually need to pay for what the information that we're receiving, and then actually apply it. Totally. So all those, I guess, structural changes, whilst, like, isn't completely changing everything, like, they're big. That's a big shift for government from where it was.
Yeah, it's a good point you make, because when I first met you in the in the languages space, you were in this, maybe earlier stages in that language journey that you've been on with early childhood, but you're probably the most valuable stakeholder internally that we had, because you could operate and think strategically in terms of what we were trying to develop from a strategy perspective in those early days of building the trust, but you also could think in terms of what does this translate and mean on the ground for what this looks like in community, and think about it from those lenses that you talked about in terms of complexity from community to country and all that sort of stuff as well. But I hear what you say in terms of, it's probably not my jam forever as a career public servant, or maybe you will be, maybe you won't be, whatever, but you've definitely got this operational lens strategically, this really nuanced but deep understanding of community and how community operates, and this whole other side to you as well, which sort of is a nice segue into what I'd really love to hear about as well, which is some of the other stuff outside of your career that you're working on as well, and sort of bit of the story around TriMob. I've been following you, in terms of your own sort of personal athletic sort of history and career. And I know you've done some amazing stuff in that sort of space, but I'd love to hear what sort of TriMob is, what it looks like, and I guess what your hopes are into the future.
Well, it looks like that. Pretty deadly. TriMob's interesting because so I got into triathlon. My first triathlon I did was in 2011. But again, it goes back to...
So you didn't grow up doing it?
No.
Okay.
No. I grew up initially playing... I did every single sport you could do. But I grew up playing soccer, which is different for a black fella. Like, there wasn't many black fellas playing soccer. But just my hometown was Pacific Palms, and soccer was the local sport. You had to go into town to play footy, so footy wasn't really even a thought until maybe in high school, but wasn't really good at tackling. But I was good at soccer, cricket, whatnot. But back in Foster, the original was where the Ironman Triathlon was.
Yeah.
So as a kid, I would go ride my bike down, and like being a kid back then was awesome because essentially bike was your freedom.
Yeah.
And I would finish school, go out with my mates on my bike, just had to be home before dark.
Yeah.
I mean, for fun, we used to go get swooped by magpies. That was like our afternoon activity on a bike. My helmet had full holes.
Yeah.
So like I was like riding a bike as a kid, running around, playing soccer. And I did nippers as a kid. Again, not many black fellas did that. So it was like swimming. But I watched the Ironman as a kid, and I used to go out there because I'd ask for water bottles, get a free water bottle. Yeah. But it did plant a seed with us as a kid that one day I would do it, but never during high school. Like I did like athletics and that, like I could run, I was decent at running, but that was all based off like soccer training and that. Yeah. And then in 2010, I quit playing soccer like when I was 18, 19. Mate bet me that I wouldn't play a rugby union. $100. Joden Perry works for NITV. So Joden Perry, he's never given me this $100. So essentially what happened is he goes, I bet you $100 you won't play rugby. And I was like, all right, because I'd had enough of soccer. I'm going off track here, I'll come back. Yeah. So I played rugby. First week, played pretty good. Yeah. I was like, where's my $100? He goes, you don't get it until you play first grade. Next week, play reserve grade, and then play like 3/4 of, I was on the bench for first grade, come on, played good again. Yeah. I was like, where's my $100? Yeah. And he goes, you don't get it until you start. Next week, started. I go, where's my $100? He goes, I'm just not giving you $100. So Joden Perry retired us. But so I was playing rugby union in 2010. I ended up getting this illness called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which was an autoimmune illness. Essentially, your immune system attacks your nervous system. And I ended up with like full paralysis, was in a wheelchair and whatnot.
Yeah, wow.
And I won't go into the full details. It was pretty hectic at the time because it takes a while to diagnose. And I went from, on a Monday, playing touch footy, and some things were happening, but like I was, you go from being fast to like on a Thursday, I couldn't keep up with forwards. By a Saturday, I had like a full facial Bell's palsy. I was starting to struggle to walk, and then a couple of days later, you're no longer able to walk. So you start to do the math of the way things are like declining, like probably going to die. So that was an interesting thing to go through at a young age, to like actually process okay, this could be it.
Yep.
But anyway, once I got diagnosed with GBS, the neurologist said, you're probably not going to have the same speed, strength, or endurance.
Mm-hmm.
So whilst in hospital, I set a couple of goals, and one to walk again.
Yep.
But it was the thing that I actually missed the most wasn't walking, the ability to walk, it was actually the ability to run.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably just realised while in hospital, like how much I took that for granted. So I kind of like, because he said certain things, I was like, well, I'm going to set, my goal is to walk and run again. The next goal is to play first grade footy.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third goal to test endurance is to do a triathlon. Because I think going back to when I was a kid, that little trigger of like, I'll do that one day, was like, that's the test of endurance. So anyway, I ended up like 6 months later, I was starting to get back to like full capacity, and I like entered this triathlon, which was in March, and I came like 230th out of 260. Like I sucked.
Yeah.
But like it was like good, like it was addicting.
Yeah.
And even my dad said to my partner at the time, he goes, well, I wonder what this is going to trigger, because I've got like a bit of addictive personality.
Yeah.
And from that day on, like I finished the year playing football in 2011, but then I moved into like running and triathlons.
Mm-hmm.
But like that was a really like selfish endeavour. And because I took it super seriously, like I ended up in the Indigenous Marathon Project in 2012.
You ran the New York Marathon, didn't you?
No.
Was it? No?
So it was I was meant to, but it got cancelled that year. So I've never done the New York. I ended up doing Tokyo Marathon.
Yep.
But I like set some goals. Like I wanted to like do a sub 3 hour marathon. So be like the first one of the Indigenous Marathon Project guys to do that. Mm-hmm. And initially the first marathon I did 3:13, and then eventually I did 2:52. But I think because of the way like I did things, like for a lot of our mob, like it's like a bit extreme.
Yep.
And I get it. And like a lot of people, like even when I was working at AIM, say you should talk about what you do at triathlon, but I was like, I don't feel like that it's going to apply to kids. Because it's just like what I'm doing is just it is a little bit ridiculous. So I was always kind of like on this selfish endeavour, but not really bringing anyone along with me. Which was like difficult, like, but also like at that particular time I was so focused on myself doing well in that sport. Like I was like, I don't have time to do all that. But anyway, another mate got into the sport around the end of 2019, and for a couple of years I'd been thinking about it'd be cool to like, generally when you do these races you just wear like this kit. It's like it'd be cool to wear something that represents my culture, because it's very much a white person sport and 100%. Quite a wealthy person sport. So like not only to represent me, but also to showcase to all these like white fellas. Like, oh,
we got a place here.
Well, there's a black fella there doing that, and he's a nice guy. He's pretty good at it. And like to change, like just get them to have this like change this narrative, and I didn't even know what narrative they might have, but I was like I could. And so he was getting into it. There's a couple other black fellas getting into it, and I did this race at Western Sydney, and there was this aunt there named Sharon Bolger. First time I met her. I started having a yarn to her, and she's like, oh, I did triathlons in the 80s, and we talked about this other black fella he did the Hawaiian Man in the 80s. I was like, there's a few mob out here actually doing this. So anyway, I kept like thinking about it, and I was talking to another mate, and then eventually I was just like, stuff it, like I'm just going to do this. And didn't really know what it was going to be, but I was like, we're just going to set up an organisation or a club that represents us, but it's open to everyone, and we're going to set a couple of goals is let's get more Indigenous people into it, and then just like let's set up a social media page, and people see like, because I think like when it was just me that you see, because I got like most people knew like within the community like I do triathlon, but it's like that's just him. But then you're like, oh, there's another person, and they're like all different abilities, different shapes, different sizes, and that starts to change I guess the narrative within
Perceptions.
our community is like, oh, like you don't have to be like him.
Yeah.
You can do it and do it at all different levels. And there is,
Totally.
and like then there's like a like as a cultural safety thing, there's like a bit of safety, and there's like, oh, there's more and more doing it. And it's like, and then you start to support, like encourage people. So essentially got set up like almost as a social media thing, called it TriMob, and goals were just get more black fellas in it, but also there's a lot of white fellas that do the sport who have never engaged with Aboriginal communities, whether they're too scared or haven't wanted to, or maybe they just didn't have black fellas around them.
Totally.
I was like, well, they love cycling, or they love triathlon, so why not just use something, again, going back to, you know, brother boy, I just forgot, Reed. Jermaine,
Yeah.
finding your commonality. It's like, well, this is their commonality, this is the sport they love, and I love it, and I'm black, so I can use it as a vehicle to like, let's get more non-Indigenous people celebrating Indigenous culture, and we use this as a vehicle.
100%.
So we made like kits. It's very much like in like hats. It's very much about Indigenous culture.
Yep.
But anyone can wear it, and a lot of people go, "Oh, like, can I buy one? Like, am I allowed to?" I'm like, that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
That you then, you know, you wear it, and then people ask you like, "Why are you wearing it?" Well, like, and that triggers a conversation to be like, you know, want to celebrate or learn more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. And it was interesting. So I actually ride with this group, Kalutsi, which is like a really, in the cycling world, at least in Australia or Sydney, like pretty well known.
Yep.
Caleb Ewan, who's like in the Tour de France right now, when he comes back to Australia, rides in it.
Yeah, wow.
And it's got this like sort of, well, it's got a mixture of people and like really good riders, but it's a group that you would never associate with like having any interest in Aboriginal community.
Yep.
And because I was riding in there and I started to like get a good reputation within the group, then I set up TriMob, and then all of a sudden like 10 of these guys bought these kits.
Yeah.
So then it like changes like the group dynamic there. And I remember one guy who hadn't been there for a while coming, he's like, "Why are you wearing it?" Because he's pointing out like my mate Dave Evans, who's like whitest of white from Birchgrove.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Why wouldn't I?"
Yeah,
like,
fuck
oh,
no.
I'm proud of our Indigenous culture. And then
Yeah,
old mate
mate.
was like, "Oh,
Makes
fair
sense.
enough."
Yeah.
And so like that, I was like, that's
it.
that's one of the elements that I was trying to achieve with this. I mean, and the
Totally.
main element is around getting more Indigenous people into the sport. That's the fundamental thing. But if we can, you know, bring on more non-Indigenous people to be proud of Indigenous culture, because I think that's core to, you know, looking at closing the gap in that. Indigenous culture should be the core narrative of Australian society.
Yeah.
That's what makes us unique.
100%.
That's what what makes New Zealand unique is the Maori culture. So if we can shift more Australians to be proud of our culture, whether it's artwork, whether it's through people, whether it's through histories and knowledges and just
language.
connecting. Yeah. So yeah, I guess it started off as just a social media thing. Then we turned it into a triathlon club. So now we have like membership, like people can join, and because to do triathlons, and you generally have to register through Triathlon Australia, and then you register through a club.
Yeah.
So our club is a nationally based club. We can accept members from all different states and territories, and I guess what makes us unique is we're the only Indigenous club in the country. So now, I guess moving forward, kind of going through a process of like, well, what's next? And nothing next has to happen, but I want it to. So I've been fortunate through, you know, my experience. I've met some great people, and they've sort of helped us out. And I ended up working at Ironman Australia doing some commentary work.
Yeah.
And I was just sitting there watching like some of these athletes, and like honestly, there was one like person who, if you were to look like they'd be at the local bolo on a Friday, putting money through the post, and like on their 10th schooner. Was out there and it was 10 o'clock at night, and they were still running, and they were going to complete an Ironman, which is a 3.8k swim, 180 kilometre ride, 42k run.
Yeah.
And like, if she can do it, there is no reason why none of our community can't do this. Like,
Yeah.
But we need to like help shift that mentality, and even like, I guess setting up TriMob, I started to notice like more people wanting to engage. But the Ironman's a bit extreme. So I guess the next thing for us is what we want to do is create an organisation as a non-for-profit, and essentially we're going to have like a health promotion arm and then like a social enterprise arm. So the social enterprise arm will help support the health promotion, and essentially what we want to do is like as an initial, to help get more people in the sport, set up what's called like the Ironman project, where we're going to take a group of Indigenous people over like an 18-month program and train them up to do an Ironman.
Yeah, wow.
And like, not only, because one of the things I guess I experience when you do this sport is you can get isolated and that, and it becomes about you and not necessarily giving back. So part of what we want to do is you obviously have this group that you'll work with. We'll have camps. So wherever we do the camps, which will be based around races, we'll then go and do stuff within the community, like health promotion, and do like little triathlons with the community. So get more of like our mob having that experience. So instead of us just going and doing an event and being about us, we're out there to give back to the community.
Totally.
And then for all our athletes, so let's say if one's based in Canberra, one's based in Toomela, wherever they might be based, depends on who applies and who we select. We will then do like a minimum of 2 triathlons within their community while they're a part of that program.
Yeah,
so
wow.
that way their community gets to be a part of their journey, but also experience triathlon. And they may never do a triathlon again. That's fine. But at least they'll gone, fuck, that was fun. It doesn't, and because a triathlon is actually at its core quite a fun event. Yeah. But it can also like, you can learn a lot about yourself and who you are and test yourself.
Totally. And there's scales too, right?
Yep.
Like I did a sprint triathlon years ago now.
Yep.
And that was like a 1K swim, a 5K run and a
20K ride.
20K
yeah,
ride.
So it's like they're all different. You're right, Sam. So there's like the sprint, which is like a 750, 25, and then you got the Olympic, which is just doubles.
Yeah.
And then you got like in Tisus, which is like maybe a 100-meter swim or 200-meter swim, and then like an 8K ride. So there's all like little things you can start off with. Like you don't have to do an Ironman per se. But what I've noticed since setting it up is there are people that are actually interested in it and more than I realised.
Totally.
And it's like you can capture them and go, all right, we'll take you through, we'll support you. And you're going to learn a lot about yourself and we're going to give back to the community. Then all of a sudden you go, so at the moment, like I know of, I think 8 Aboriginal Tri-Athlon people have done an Ironman, and one sister girl, Nadine Hunt, who was a part of the Indigenous Marathon Project, she did an Ironman the other week. I think she's the first ever Torres Strait Islander person and most likely the first Torres Strait Islander female to ever do an Ironman.
Yeah, true.
So you get like all of a sudden there's 8 of us that have done it, and we get another 6, and then another 6, another 6, and it's all of a sudden like it doubles. Yeah. So if we go by like say 2032 and we've got 50 Aboriginal Tri-Athlon people who've done an Ironman, and all of them have then we've done all these triathlons in the community. Like who knows what that ends up doing?
Totally.
And not only for our community, but then that narrative within the triathlon community go like, oh, look at all these deadly Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people who are doing such great things.
Totally.
So that's, I guess, the goal, and like the social enterprise element is just so we're not relying on government money.
Yeah, definitely.
Is to look at like partnering with the right brands and like how can they improve the way they work with Indigenous people. So because we're doing the Ironman project, like we're potentially going to work with Ironman Oceania who do events. So looking at, at their events, how can they incorporate the local Indigenous community better, from welcome to countries to celebrating Indigenous culture to involving them in the event and not in a tokenistic. So really like looking at their organisation and where are they at and where can we help them go.
Sounds like you're consulting on reconciliation action plans,
in a way, yeah. I mean, I'm not I think RAPs have a good purpose, but
they're a good starting point sometimes.
Yeah, I always find it interesting that you need a Commonwealth government agency in some way to oversee good practice, but that's another story.
Yeah. But it's a similar sort of process to what you're sort of talking to, right?
Like,
and a deep dive into where they're at and how they can build.
And we're talking with 2XU as well as a potential partner, and that could have, like, they do products. So it's like, well, let's look at your products and go, does it elevate Indigenous voices? Currently, no. So how about work with one of our artists and in your jerseys or kits, you have Indigenous artwork. So not only does it like you've like benefit or empowered that artist through like their own social enterprise of getting paid as an artist and getting the name out, but your clothing will just look better as well. And then you're like in doing that, you're like as a major brand going, we celebrate Indigenous culture. So how does that then shift the narrative within the Australian community?
Definitely.
And you see a lot of companies are starting to do that, which is really positive. But I guess we can play that role like within partners that are associated with our sport, which is a white sport.
Totally.
And I just think too, I know at the professional level, a lot of the professional triathletes, they don't get paid that well.
Yeah.
But if you look at the sports that athletes get paid really well, soccer, basketball, they have diverse communities.
Yeah.
And our triathlon doesn't have a diverse community. So we're about bringing that diversity or bringing deadliness and bringing our culture. And I guess if you get more Indigenous people interested, and maybe we'll unearth some really good talent too.
Totally.
Potentially get a kid who goes to the Olympics. You've diversified. The athletes are getting paid more. Like it changes the whole sport.
Definitely.
And then you just look at, same as like New Zealand rugby. Like they used to just have all white fellas and they were pretty ordinary, and now the Maoris involved and they just can't be beaten. So it benefits, I think, everyone. And
100%.
benefits us. So.
You said, touch on there, you said, you might get a kid that gets picked up, goes to the Olympics. And all that. When you talk about TriMob, with who you are and your background with children and young people, I know, you've done, I remember, you take your, as a parent, you'd have your kids at I'd see them doing park runs and stuff. Like, I know
they're my niece and nephew. I call them my like son and daughter, but they're not. Not my actual kids.
But very much a parent in the definition of the word. And so I've seen you do that sort of stuff, in that sort of space, and then your background with children and young people, and talking about, I guess, triathlon in terms of accessibility and very much is a white sport, and I guess you've identified this massive gap that you're filling and growing, and so much of our communities operate as a collective, right? So, like you've said, as this grows, it's going to just continue to flourish.
Yeah.
But what are some of your thoughts when you think about it from a youth sort of? Do you have any thoughts in terms of what you think for young people and how you could work in this space?
Yeah, I got ideas. I haven't really landed on what that looks like, but definitely. Want to run like youth probably as a starting point would be like camps.
Yep.
And triathlon would potentially be an aspect of it.
Yeah.
Or maybe it'd be a core, but like there'd be more to it as well, like with like culture and who like carrying yourself as an individual. Like
totally.
I wouldn't just base it on just like a part of everything we do, whether you use a certain sport as a vehicle, is you're trying to develop good young people as humans, as that should be the primary goal. But yeah, definitely have like thoughts around, I guess, providing more avenues for kids to get into the sport and then supporting them on whatever pathway they want to go. If that's an elite pathway, then that's great. And there is actually a lot of talent, I think, that just goes, that isn't, I guess, ever going into the sport that could be realised. Like, it's funny, like you look at a lot of our kids, they want to put the NRL players like in this area because NRL is a sport. But you look at them, you're like, you're not built for NRL.
Yeah.
You're built AFL or running. Like you're a lean person.
Totally. But that's the thing, right? Yeah. Rugby league dominates our communities because it's accessible.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's free.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, right? If you can break down some of those barriers for our young people, that's where those doors get open for those kids, right?
Yeah.
Where they go, oh wow, actually my place is here.
Yeah.
Here's where I'm.
But you need there's a safety in numbers.
Yeah.
So we've got to build that community to give that safety in numbers so that people want to be a part of that community.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll tell just two yarns of where I see that working well, but also around our ability. So in high school, the year below me, there was a kid named Brett Lee, Aboriginal kid, not the cricketer.
Yeah, I was going to say,
He's an Aboriginal musician and super talented. He's a qualified teacher. So looking up, he's changed his name to Piratini, like on his Instagram. But anyway, he was a year younger than us, and he did triathlons. He, in the under-19s World Championship, he was 17 and he came 7th in the world.
Yeah, wow.
So that's how good he was. He ended up having a really bad bike accident, and then he's got knee issues. But he could have been anything. So people that he was beating from Australia all went to the Olympics. There's a photo of him with a person named Marinda Carfrae. She went on to be a 3-time Hawaiian Ironman world champion. And there was 2 other fellas, Brendan Sexton and another guy. They all became like 2-time, 3-time Olympians.
Yeah, wow.
He was beating them.
Yeah,
so
true.
that could have been him. And one of the things I remember so vividly at school, we did this 1,500 metre race. And because it was 1,500, less people did it, but so you'd have like more age groups. And in that 1,500 metre race, the first 4 finishers were Aboriginal.
Yeah.
And Brett Lee, the national triathlon champion, on the cusp of nearly coming 7th in the world, he got 2nd.
Yeah.
And Benji Holden, who was a year older, mind you, but he was a national touch player.
Yeah.
He beat him in a sprint finish. And we were just like, Brett trained for it, and Benji, just based off
rocked
just
up and
pure
had a
ability,
crack.
just beat him. And then there was me 3rd, a little bit further back, and another fella named Ethan Whiteman, who was ended up a gun swimmer, came 4th.
Yeah.
So I always thought, I was like, wow, like the first 4 finishers, black fellas, and the kid who goes on to become 7th in the world, 2 years younger, he gets 2nd in that race.
Yeah.
So you're like, wow, we've got a lot of talent. So if you can capture that and give them the vehicle,
Totally.
who knows what can happen.
Totally.
And then going to the thing around, this kind of ties back into education, is one of the, I think, the keys to almost success in education is, and cultural safety, is actually the safety in numbers.
Totally.
And working at AIM, one of the schools that was the most successful as far as getting Indigenous kids through school, and it was nothing really that the school did with St. Skulls. And it was just based on, I thought, pure numbers of kids at their school. They created their own safety.
Number of good kids there.
Yeah. So because they had the boarding, like the kids would often complain about, what was happening in the school, the way they were treated, but they became their own safety.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Black spaces.
Yeah. So they had like 50 girls.
Yeah.
So they just created their own little community. And I think it could almost be the same with TriMob. It's like, you don't want it to be obviously a culturally unsafe sport, but by the more people you get there, the more likely there's more safety and the more interest you're going to get, and then it'll also breed its own success.
Totally. I think you're 100% right. I think and one of my favourite times of the year is talking about that model that you've talked about, and community and place-based events and programs and strategies like that. I think is so powerful. And I think about when you've emceed the Father's Day Warrior Run stuff that Indigenous Marathon Foundation's behind. Yeah. And I'm spewing COVID's paused it the last 2 years, but I went 3 years in a row. Every year, that's how I love to spend my Father's Day. No better way than to celebrate culture, role model being a healthy, strong dad, and get a bit of a sweat up. But I'm there and I'm surrounded by mob that are competing, being a part of it, culture's on display. But what I love about it as well is it's Father's Day, right? So it's very much a family's personal day. But there's so many different backgrounds that are there that are choosing to spend their Father's Day, doing this fun run sort of thing for the same sort of reasons. And for me, when you just talk about that sort of stuff, I love going there because for me, I've got active kids and I would love them to get involved in triathlon and all that sort of stuff. But for me, I don't see the right youth space for them to be able to channel that. And that's where I get really excited by your stuff, because I'm like, wow, who knows in 5 years where my kids that are at that age where they could be moving into that, that there's opportunities and spaces for them to really flourish. And for the rest of the community to come along on that journey with them, it's mad. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, who knows where it could be. I've got COVID. It was interesting because really when we set up TriMob, probably the initial thing I was I'll just put some events on, but COVID didn't really allow that. So I've got to get that up and running too. I just think just doing some stuff at Heffron, it's easy. I guess the challenge is you just got to get the people there initially.
Totally.
and then you got to have. I think one of the things I've got to let go is like also the concept of like perfection.
Yeah,
You've got to have everything like it doesn't actually need to be. It just needs to be fun. Like even if there's no bikes initially, you got to pull. Kids do a swim. You do a one lap. And,
Totally.
Sausage sizzle. Like what was that like? Fun. Like you got all these other black fellas doing it.
Totally.
Might have white fellas there too.
Yeah.
But just create that community and
100%.
make things fun. So yeah, like I'm excited as you are. I guess one of my greatest weaknesses has always been like great ideas, but not the follow through.
Yeah.
And TriMob's probably one of the first things I've actually thought like this is a good idea and actually followed through. But then there's also follow through on the follow through. So yeah, like I'm really excited as far as structurally we're starting to get sound. Next step will be, this Ironman project, but also these community events. And I guess once we're also set up, I mean, I'd love to do some stuff just at NCIE, like with kids like learn to swim and that.
Yeah.
Because I was really fortunate in, I guess where I grew up, like swimming, because I did nippers, it was like just one of the things you have to do, but like it's a little bit foreign for some of our communities, like kids can swim, but to actually do swim, like
Totally.
And then swim in the ocean.
Yeah.
And that's even been a battle for like my niece and nephew. Like they're quite good in the water, but like just that fear around it, like big surf, and like I used to get fearful as a kid, but like it would be highly unlikely that I would ever drown.
Yeah.
But many of our like mob are like so scared, either sometimes because of sharks, but they're like the fear of drowning, like is a real thing. Like and so just don't venture in. But like I love knowing that I can just chuck my kids and I'm like they'll be fine.
Yeah,
they're gonna
definitely.
Just leave them. And that's what I'd love for like a lot of our kids to have that feeling too, to be like I'm safe. I can get wherever I go. Like I'll be sweet. And also that because the beach is like I think I'm a saltwater person. It's one of the most pure things. Like it's got so many like health benefits, mental health benefits.
Totally.
But like for some of our mob, they're just so fearful of it. They don't like have that opportunity to engage in the ocean, and that doesn't need to be through like to do triathlon or to do surf club, but just to be able to like go out and feel the ocean and feel like its energy and be connected to it.
Definitely.
And I do love what even moving away, like there's actually so much more mob, and going even back to this story about Walgett, like where you got people from the community building things. There's been so many like indigenous communities now that are doing that. Yeah. Like up in Fingal, I think it's Jarakai Surf. They've started their own indigenous surf group. Yeah. There's another one at Coughs. Yeah. And all like Wandigali, which is like they've had that surf contest at Newcastle. Like there's so many good things happening from community there. Like I love seeing that we've got more mob who are like just building the community that like they want to see. Totally. And that's like changes the whole way our communities work. Massively. And they're the people that need to be at the forefront of like all these NAIDOC gigs and that we're talking about. Like they're the people changes. Totally. Community changes. Totally. So I guess happy to play a small role in that, and I've got a passion for triathlon, and if other people want to get involved, then that's great. The one good thing I think about triathlon is, unlike rugby league, it's very hard for you to play first grade football with your son or your daughter or whatnot. Yeah. But you can always like go for a run with your kid or go for a swim. Like triathlon you can do as a family. Totally. Or just simply running you can do as a family. So it has that ability to do, like if your kid's 5 and you're 55, you can do that with your kid. Definitely. Which you just can't necessarily do in other sports. And also it's something that you can do until the day you die, whereas soccer, football, like that has a shelf life, and what do you do after that? And I'm like not trying to push people away from football, but it is a really good sport to get into, like because I think a lot of our mob struggle like on the boys and girls side now because so many girls are playing, but like once football's over or whatnot, like what do you do? Totally. And I've seen like a lot, like our mob, like they end up putting on a lot of weight after they finish football because they don't have that structure anymore. Definitely. And triathlon is a vehicle to go, here's something that I can pursue and have a focus and be driven. I think people always need to have a purpose, both in work, but just in, you know, general life too. And I think triathlon is a really good vehicle of like having a purpose, like something to train for, something to work towards, and it kind of has no shelf life. Like you can literally do it to the day you die.
It's good. You touched on something getting towards the end of our yarn, and we've covered so much stuff. But you just talked about purpose. Have you landed on what that's a big question, a big point. Have you landed on what you think your purpose is?
I think purpose changes. It's kind of the same as asking a kid in year 7, what do you want to do?
Yeah, totally.
I think, I've gone through like different phases of what my purpose. I always think at the core is around giving back to community. And not like in an accountability way, like if you don't, like that's a bad thing, but like I just feel happier when I've like provided something and it's not about me as an individual. I think, my purpose this point in time in life is one, to be a good role model for my niece and nephew, and be like engaged in their life, and to not necessarily give them opportunities or anything, but just to support them to become good people and happy people.
Totally.
And I think my other purpose is, well, I guess my current role is like to try to create as much systemic change as possible. And then the other one is with TriMob is to try to create, I guess my purpose is to create an organisation that will be around in 50 years that will help create an avenue that currently doesn't exist for our community. And I don't necessarily have any goals of like, if that creates an Olympian, like that's not what it's about. If that happens, that's fantastic, but that it creates an avenue that makes our communities happier and healthier.
Yeah, love it. Can't wait to see it, bro. Maybe my son will be one of them kids at the Olympics. Who knows?
Who knows?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I'll be his manager.
That's it. Well, hey, look, thank you so much for sitting down. I feel like we covered a lot of ground. I feel like we could have...
like a triathlon, covered a lot of ground.
That's it. And sprinted through a lot of different sort of parts of your journey. You know, and I feel like there was so much there that we probably could have done more of a deep dive into to really sort of flesh out. But overall, it's just been really, you know, nice for me to hear your journey from early days to where you got to now. And I guess I've seen different stages of that professionally in terms of what you've been able to do, and to see the impact that you've had for our mob in the education space. Well, not just you, but you've been a significant part of a massive growth in our state here in New South Wales. To be able to understand that and sort of see what the sort of future can look like as well. You know, I've got kids that are 2 years old that are going to grow up benefiting from the impacts of this work that you're doing. So for me, it's just really powerful to be able to sit and hear that. And then it's just inspiring, bar, to be able to understand sort of similar sort of operating sort of strategies in a lot of ways, you know, like triathlon, big part of your identity as a person, right? Part of what you love to do, it makes up who you are. But you're wired in a way to sort of seek out ways to embed, you know, how this sort of stuff can add value and bring our people along on that journey as well. So, thanks, Bart. It's been really good, and
no, good. Appreciate
always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers, bro.
All right.